Welcome back to another episode of I Wish They Knew, a show where we share big ideas that deserve more attention in about the time it takes to enjoy a cup of coffee. I'm Joe Hirsch. Today's wish comes from Dr. Christopher Phelps. Chris is the U.S. CEO of the Cialdini Institute, which trains leaders and organizations around the world in the art and science of ethical persuasion. Chris is also a general dentist and entrepreneur who's built multiple companies focused on dental products and services and is the best-selling author of 2 books in that space. And he is here today to talk about how we can become more persuasive the right way in our everyday lives. Chris, welcome to the show.
Nice. Thank you, Joe, for having me.
What do you wish more people knew when it came to this very important topic of persuasion?
For me, it's that they knew that there was an art and a science to this, and both kind of go hand in hand. I know growing up, my brother-in-law was always the number one sales guy in everything that he did. And I always used to marvel at how he did that. Whatever the contest was, he was always winning it. And when I tried to ask him what made him the success and what was his secret, so to speak, he had no clue, right? And his only advice was, I don't know, come hang out with me and watch me and see if you pick up on what I can do. And I go through this whole day and him interacting with his clients. And I'm like, at the end of the day, he's like, so what do you think? What's my secret? I'm like, I don't know. They like you. They love this guy. Like they were his buddy. They were his pal. Like I thought that can't be it. But then I realized it was instinctively, like most of the best communicators out there and salespeople are instinctively tapping into some of Cialdini's principles, but they don't realize it. And so therefore, but because they are tapping into it and others aren't, they stand out in contrast and they perform better as a result. So being able to see him in action, this art, and then now learning there's actual science to this, which actually gave me hope because while you may not naturally be good at this stuff, learning the science and you can be taught this, so to speak, now you can actually learn to have more influence and persuasion than the best quote unquote communicators out there.
I think I saw this stat on your site, something like 24 minutes out of a working hour every day
Every day.
is spent on persuading and convincing and influencing others in some form or fashion, regardless of your industry, regardless of your title or your station at work. That's an astonishing amount of time that we spend doing this, but most of us are doing it badly. Where are we making mistakes?
Yeah, we're making a lot of mistakes in that. Number one, we're asking for things, but we're not getting commitments from people from the things that we ask, right? And that's one of our principles is consistency. That basically states that when people commit, they do. Well, then I wondered in my own practices, like, why weren't my patients referring like they said they would? Or why weren't they saying yes to treatment and coming back or doing reviews for us? Why do I keep having to micromanage my team and tell them to do stuff instead of them just doing it? And lo and behold, come to find out it's because even though I made requests, there was no commitment. And without the commitment, they don't do. So I think that's probably a huge mistake I see people make in any request that they make. They're not getting a commitment prior.
Okay, so lack of commitment, lack of consistency. Are there other things that seem to be low-hanging opportunities that people just aren't taking advantage of in their everyday work?
Yeah, believe it or not only what we say to people is important, but the order in which we say it from a behavioral science standpoint is even more important. You see, the brain has this funny thing where what you say first changes its perception on what comes next and what value it puts on this other thing that follows. As I like to say, a this or that scenario, this wakes the brain up for that. That, according to the brain, is important, and we should put more emphasis on whatever that is, positive or negative. So, for instance, you could be saying the right things, but have the order completely wrong, and it could automatically be setting the stage for a no. So, for instance, if I had asked somebody, "Hey, I've got good news and bad news to tell you. Which would you prefer?" Well, you should now understand that you need to control that choice if you would like one of those two to be perceived better than the others. Because if I start with the bad news is this, but the good news is this, well, suddenly the good news seems a whole lot better and it's more attractive.
Are lashing on to that bad instead of thinking about the good.
Exactly. So whatever you leave them with is what you leave them with.
These principles are baked into everyday life, right? From sales to marketing to communication. And as you said, the best communicators instinctively know how to tap into this, like your brother-in-law. So for those who are not completely familiar, like the 5 of you out there who aren't familiar with Cialdini's principles, give us a run by of what that looks like.
So what he discovered was now we know 7 key principles that the majority of people are using the majority of the time to make their decisions. Not logic, not rational thought, but these 7 principles. And then one of them is reciprocity. So when you give a gift of value and significance to someone, there's an obligation created inside of them to give back in kind, right? You do them a favor, they're going to want to do you a favor, so to speak. The liking principle. We like to do business with people we like. And if I don't like you, then I'm probably not going to do business with you and say yes to you, right? So with liking, it's about showing others that you like them, right? And then they're going to reciprocate back and like you. We've got unity, our newest principle. Typically, in an interaction with another person, it's a you versus me situation, right? We're on opposite ends of this debate, this negotiation. Well, with unity, it's about flipping that around. So it's not a you versus me, it's a we situation. So when you are of us, then you're united with us. And we more likely want to say yes to those people united with us. You've got a big one right now, probably one of the most powerful influencers in online marketing and advertising, social proof. Oftentimes we look to the evidence of what others are doing to show us what we should be doing. Okay. So if the crowd moves one direction, there's a pull on us to want to do the same. We've got the authority principle, which just states that oftentimes we look for credible, trustworthy people to give us advice, true experts, not just a scratch and sniff authority, as I call them. We look to credible, trustworthy experts because we don't have time to be an expert in everything. And we need shortcuts from true opinion leaders like that, true experts, to guide us to be that shortcut for us. And of course, our last principle, which most people are probably familiar with, is called scarcity. And scarcity is multiple things. What makes you unique, what makes you the scarce resource. But at the same time, it's about loss. And by definition, it's about when resources are truly dwindling or are about to run out, then that uber motivates you to want that thing more and do more to get it, even if you didn't want it to start with. And so we've seen all kinds of examples of scarcity in our daily routine. Probably the biggest one in the last several years is when COVID hit and you couldn't find toilet paper anywhere. Welcome to the world of scarcity.
Exactly. And the scarcity of time, scarcity of resources, definitely something we see all the time. I'm wondering, of all these principles, is there one in particular that is more susceptible to abuse than others? Because that line between persuasion and outright manipulation, it can be thin, can't it?
It can be very thin. I would say probably the most abused I see is the scarcity principle, followed by reciprocity. And so with scarcity, it's kind of like, hey, offer limited to the first 5 who respond. But wait, this is the 15th time I've seen that same offer. So it's easy to walk this line and cross over this line of the ethics of using these things. Kind of with reciprocity, I see this in that people feel like they use it as an entitlement. So because I've given to you, I now expect to get something in return. It's not a guarantee. And so just by, if you think you're going to do this and every time expect someone to reciprocate, it's not the case, right? And to me, that's an unethical use of the principle. They're trying to leverage something at the other person's expense.
So, what are some of the ways we can defend ourselves against some of these manipulative practices? Is it just a matter of keeping our guard up, or are there other countermeasures that we might use to prevent it?
Yeah, good question. I mean, part of it comes from understanding the principles. So most of the time when we see these things in nature, so to speak, it just triggers a response, right? It stays in that kind of system 1, below the water surface, if you will, area. And without rational thought, just triggers a reaction. Yes. So even being trained in the principles, I'm still susceptible to them. So I'm standing in line at Starbucks, right? And I'm waiting to place my drink order. And I'm looking at the food. And of course, they put all the food out there in a nice display, enticing you to buy it now. Because if you see it, you're more likely to buy it. And they used to do the banana loaf, and they put the whole loaf out there in 6 slices, right? And every time there were 6 slices, I could resist the urge every time. But when it got down to like 2 or 1 slice left in this thing, and I'd be looking at it going, there's only 1 or 2 left. God, there's a big line behind me. I may want one later. You know what? Screw it. I'll take the banana bread. Okay, I get it. And then there I am sitting there eating that stupid thing, and I'm like, you idiot. This is not the last piece of banana bread. I bet they got a whole freaking closet full of it, banana bread. Okay. But in that moment, It didn't get to the rational thought. So, number one, don't feel bad. These things apply in places our brains don't usually think. Your biggest recourse is the more educated you are, at least I recognized it in that moment. So the next time this came up, and I was like, you know what? You fell for that last time, stupid. No. Okay. Don't do it. Resist the banana bread kind of thing. So sometimes you learn through trial and error, you learn through experience. The other thing is when I see the social proof stuff, now I see it for what it is, even though I may feel that pull. It's like now putting my hand on a hot stove. I've taught myself, hey, when you see this, or if you see this, then you need to think this. So creating these if then statements for yourselves are pretty powerful commitments you can make. So when I say, if I see the crowd moving this direction or doing a certain thing, then I'm going to ask myself a simple question. Does that make sense for me? And just by bringing that top of mind and thinking about it logically, forcing it up to the surface, now I got a chance.
Benefit to calling people out on some of these manipulative practices like, oh, I see what you're doing here. I know that technique and you're just workshopping me right now. So if we were to actually not only name it for ourselves, but make it obvious to the other person that we understand what's happening, has that been shown to reduce the incidence of manipulation, or at least the likelihood that we'll fall prey to it?
Definitely, you're less likely to fall prey to it because you'll see it coming. The challenge is you don't know, is it manipulative or is it true influence and persuasion? And so we should probably stop and differentiate those two things, because I often find we in our world use the word influence more than persuasion because persuasion's got a bad rap. Okay. It's been lumped into this category of manipulation and coercion and intimidation, or hierarchical authority, as we call it. You're somebody in charge of you, a boss, whatever, telling you to do stuff. Those things are all united. Okay. Coercion, manipulation, force, hierarchical authority, somebody telling you to do stuff. But that's actually polar opposite to what true influence and persuasion is. In every one of those scenarios, you don't feel like you have a viable choice. So in essence, you feel like someone has taken away your control. True influence and persuasion is all about that person having that choice. No one is taking it away from them. So in essence, by definition, if you as the recipient receive a message in some format, you hear it, you see it, you read it, but you get exposed to a message, and something about that message is what changes your perspective. It changes your mindset. And when you change your perspective, you change your mindset, you then change your thinking about that thing, then you change your behavior. And the truth of the matter is, no one forced you to do it. No one told you to think about it that way. You chose to do that. You were in full control of it. Now comes the question, well, how do you know if you're ethically influencing people, or are you on that line of manipulation, coercion, intimidation, and have crossed over to take away their control? Well, again, if you're giving them a true choice, you're on the influence and persuasion side. And then, of course, it's got to be a win-win for everybody. It can't be a win for me and a loss for the other person, just like it can't be a win for them and a loss for me. It doesn't mean that both sides aren't going to have some cost doing business together, but the net win should be there for us both. We should both benefit by saying yes and doing business together. Not we should both lose, and or one loses and one wins.
At the end of the day, it's about doing for another person, not doing to another person.
This is for both of us. And if we don't get a yes here, we both lose. That's how we need to approach it.
For all things ethical persuasion, you can go look at the Cialdini Institute in the US by Dr. Chris Phelps. Chris, thanks for sharing your wish with us today.
Thanks, Joe.